The blood trail in the snow was the first thing Ethan Orwell noticed, and his heart seized when he realized it came from fresh boot prints barely larger than a child's. December wind cut through the Sierra Nevada foothills with merciless precision as he urged his horse forward, scanning the white expanse stretching toward the mountains east of San Jose, California. The year was 1877, and these winter storms could kill a grown man in hours, let alone whoever was leaving that desperate path through knee-deep powder. When he crested the ridge, he saw her, a figure in a tattered brown dress stumbling through drifts, one hand pressed against her swollen belly, the other reaching forward as if she could grab salvation from the frozen air itself. Ethan kicked his mare into a gallop, snow spraying beneath the hooves as he closed the distance. The woman collapsed just as he reached her, falling to her knees with a cry that tore through the howling wind. He was off his horse before she hit the ground completely, his strong arms catching her shoulders as she gasped and shuddered. Her face was pale as the snow around them, lips blue with cold, dark hair plastered to her cheeks with sweat despite the freezing temperature. She could not have been more than 20 years old, and when her eyes met his, they were wild with pain and terror. "Please," she gasped, her fingers clutching at his coat with surprising strength. "Please, the baby is coming. He will find me. He will kill us both." Ethan did not waste time asking questions. He stripped off his heavy coat and wrapped it around her trembling shoulders, then lifted her onto his horse with practiced efficiency. She cried out as another contraction seized her body, and he felt her fingernails dig into his arm even through his thick shirt. His cabin was only 2 miles north, nestled in a grove of pines where he had lived alone for the past 3 years, since leaving his family's ranch in Texas. 2 miles that might as well have been 20 with a woman in active labor and a storm gathering strength overhead. "Hold on to me," he commanded, swinging up behind her and wrapping one arm around her waist to keep her secure. "What is your name?" "Winona," she managed between ragged breaths. "Winona Nash." "Winona, I am Ethan. I am going to get you somewhere safe, but you need to stay conscious. Talk to me." "Who is after you?" Her response was cut off by another contraction, this one so severe that she screamed, the sound swallowed by wind and distance. Ethan urged his horse faster, feeling Winona's body arch against him as pain consumed her. Her dress was soaked through, he realized, not just with snow but with fluid from her breaking water. This baby was not waiting for convenient timing or safe shelter. This baby was coming whether they were ready or not. The cabin appeared through the swirling white like a miracle, its solid log walls a promise of warmth and protection. Ethan practically fell from the saddle, pulling Winona down with him and half carrying, half dragging her to the door. His fingers were numb as he fumbled with the latch, and then they were inside, the relative warmth hitting them like a physical force. He kicked the door shut against the storm and deposited Winona on his bed, the only real piece of furniture besides a table and 2 chairs. "I need to get a fire going," he said, already moving toward the hearth. "Then I need you to tell me what to do because I have delivered foals and calves but never a human baby." Winona would have laughed if she was not gripping the blanket beneath her with white-knuckled intensity. "I have never done this either," she gasped. "Oh God, it hurts. It hurts so much." Ethan had the fire blazing within minutes, years of frontier living making his movements automatic even as his mind raced. He filled his largest pot with snow and set it to melt over the flames, then gathered every clean cloth he owned. His hands shook, and he forced himself to breathe slowly. Panic would help no one. He had faced down rustlers and bears and drought, and he would face this too. "Tell me about who is chasing you," he said, kneeling beside the bed and meeting her eyes. I need to know what we are dealing with." Winona's face contorted with another contraction, and Ethan counted silently, timing it. When she could speak again, tears leaked from the corners of her eyes. "My husband," she whispered. "Thomas Nash. He is a foreman at the Murphy Ranch outside San Jose. When he found out I was carrying his child, he said he would kill me. He said no child of his would be born into this world to suffer like he did. Why did you not go to the law?" "Thomas is the law," she said bitterly. "His brother is the sheriff. His cousins ride with the Murphy outfit. There is no one in San Jose who would stand against him. I waited until he rode out 3 days ago, and then I ran. I have been walking ever since, trying to reach the mining camps in the mountains where I thought I might find work. But the storm came and I got lost, and then the pain started." Ethan felt cold rage settle in his gut alongside the fear. He had seen men like Thomas Nash before, men who thought they owned everything and everyone around them, who dealt out cruelty as casually as breathing. "He will not touch you here," he said, and meant it with every fiber of his being. "You are safe now." Another contraction seized her, this one lasting nearly a full minute, and when it passed, Winona was sobbing. "I need to push," she gasped. "Ethan, I cannot stop it. The baby is coming now." Everything that happened next took on a dreamlike quality in Ethan's memory. He helped her out of her wet dress, preserving her modesty as much as possible with blankets while checking to see how far along the labor had progressed. He had no real idea what he was looking for, but instinct and experience with animals guided his hands. The water he had heated was ready, and he washed his hands and arms thoroughly before returning to her side. "When the next pain comes, push with everything you have," he said, his voice steadier than he felt. "I am right here. I will not leave you." Winona nodded, her face sheened with sweat despite the lingering chill in the cabin. When the contraction hit, she bore down with a strength that seemed impossible for someone so small and exhausted. Ethan could see the top of the baby's head, dark hair matted with fluid, and his heart hammered so hard he thought it might burst from his chest. He supported her leg with one hand and kept the other ready to catch the child when it emerged. "Again," he urged when she paused to gasp for air. "You are so close, Winona. One more." She pushed, and the baby's head crowned fully. Ethan worked carefully to ease it free, and then with the next contraction the shoulders followed, and suddenly he was holding a tiny, slippery, perfectly formed human being in his hands. For a moment that stretched into eternity, the cabin was silent except for the crackle of the fire and Winona's ragged breathing. Then the baby drew in its first breath and let out a wail that was the most beautiful sound Ethan had ever heard. "It is a boy," he said, his voice cracking with emotion he had not expected. "You have a son." He cleaned the baby quickly with warm water and soft cloths, then wrapped him in the cleanest blanket he owned before placing him in Winona's arms. She was crying openly now, staring down at the red-faced infant with an expression of such pure love that Ethan had to look away. He tended to the afterbirth and made sure Winona was not bleeding too heavily, then cleaned everything up with shaking hands. When he finally allowed himself to collapse into the chair beside the bed, he realized the sun was setting, painting the snow outside in shades of orange and pink. "Thank you," Winona whispered, not looking up from her baby's face. "You saved our lives. What will you name him?" She was quiet for a long moment, running one finger over the baby's tiny fist. "Samuel," she said finally. "Samuel means God has heard. It seems fitting." Ethan nodded, unable to form words past the tightness in his throat. He stood and moved to the window, scanning the darkening landscape for any signs of pursuit. The storm had intensified, which meant no one would be traveling tonight, but come morning Thomas Nash might very well pick up their trail. He had to think, to plan, to figure out how to keep these two people safe when he barely knew them but already felt responsible for them in a way that defied logic. Over the next 3 days, the storm raged without mercy, trapping them all in the small cabin. Ethan hunted through his limited supplies to make nourishing meals for Winona, who needed to recover her strength and feed the baby. He changed and washed cloths, boiled water, kept the fire burning day and night. And slowly, in the quiet moments between tasks, he learned her story. Winona had grown up in Sacramento, the daughter of a schoolteacher who died when she was 15. Her mother had passed years earlier, leaving her alone in the world. She had taken work as a seamstress and laundress, barely scraping by until Thomas Nash came through town with a cattle drive. He had been charming at first, attentive and generous with his money. And when he proposed after only 3 weeks of courtship, she had said yes out of loneliness and desperation more than love. "I knew something was wrong on our wedding night," she said quietly, rocking Samuel in her arms as firelight danced across the walls. "He drank until he could barely stand, and then he told me I was his property now, that I would do exactly as he said or face the consequences. I thought about running then, but where would I go? I had no money, no family, no friends who would risk standing against him, so I stayed and endured it." "How long were you married?" Ethan asked, his jaw tight. 8 months. "When I realized I was carrying his child, I made the mistake of being happy about it. I thought maybe a baby would soften him, give him something to love besides whiskey and his own anger. Instead, he flew into a rage. He said terrible things about what he would do when the child was born, and I knew he meant every word. That was when I started planning my escape." Ethan felt his hands curl into fists. "You were brave," he said, "braver than most men I have known." Winona looked at him then, really looked at him, and something passed between them that made Ethan's breath catch. She was beautiful despite her exhaustion, with high cheekbones and dark eyes that held depths of pain and resilience. But more than that, she was strong in a way that had nothing to do with physical power. She had walked through a blizzard while in labor to save her child. She had survived months of abuse and come out the other side still capable of love and hope. "Tell me about you," she said. "Why does a man like you live alone in a cabin in the middle of nowhere?" Ethan smiled without humor. "I could ask you the same question. Why do you assume I am a good man? Because you delivered my baby and asked nothing in return. Because you have been nothing but gentle and respectful when you could have taken advantage of my situation. Because I saw the way you looked at Samuel when you placed him in my arms, like he was precious." He was quiet for a long time, staring into the fire. "I left Texas 3 years ago after my younger brother was killed in a range war. Our family raised cattle, and we got caught between 2 bigger outfits fighting over water rights. Daniel was only 17, and he died because men with more money and guns decided his life did not matter. I could not stay there anymore, could not keep pretending that working the ranch meant something when it had cost us everything that actually mattered. So I came to California and built this cabin and told myself I was better off alone." "Are you," Winona asked softly, "better off alone?" Ethan met her eyes, and the answer stuck in his throat. 3 days ago he would have said yes without hesitation. Now, with this woman and her newborn child filling his cabin with life and purpose, he was not so sure. He was 24 years old and had been running from his own pain for so long he had forgotten what it felt like to let someone in. But something about Winona made him want to try. The storm finally broke on the 4th day, leaving the world buried under 3 feet of fresh snow and sparkling with harsh winter sunlight. Ethan saddled his horse and rode into San Jose, keeping his hat pulled low and his collar high. He stopped at the general store first, buying supplies he claimed were for himself, extra food and cloth, and a few bottles of milk for the baby since Winona was struggling to produce enough on her own. The storekeeper was a talkative man, and it did not take much prompting to get him gossiping about local news. "Terrible thing about Thomas Nash's wife," the man said as he wrapped Ethan's purchases. "Ran off in the middle of a blizzard, can you imagine? Thomas has been beside himself, got every man who will listen out looking for her. Says she is not right in the head, poor thing, and he fears she will hurt herself if she is not found soon." Ethan kept his expression carefully neutral. "That is unfortunate. Have they had any luck tracking her?" "Not with that storm. Some folks think she froze to death out there, but Thomas insists she is still alive. He is offering a reward to anyone who brings her home safe. $50. $50 was more money than most men in San Jose saw in 6 months. Ethan thanked the storekeeper and left quickly, his mind racing. Thomas was smarter than he had hoped, spinning a story that made him look like the concerned husband while painting Winona as unstable. If anyone found her, they would hand her right back to her abuser without question, probably congratulating themselves for their good deed. He made one more stop before leaving town, at the office of a lawyer named Herbert Finch who had a reputation for being honest, a rarity in these parts. Ethan explained the situation in careful terms, asking hypothetically what rights a woman had to leave her husband if he was violent. Finch listened gravely, then delivered the harsh truth that Ethan already suspected. "In the eyes of the law, a wife is her husband's property," Finch said. "If he wants her back, he has every legal right to retrieve her by whatever means necessary. The only exception would be if she could prove in court that he intended to murder her, and even then the burden of proof would be extraordinarily high. Her word against his would never be enough, especially if he has family connections in law enforcement. What if she just disappeared?" Ethan pressed. "Moved somewhere far away and started over under a different name. Then she would be breaking the law, and if her husband tracked her down, he could have her arrested for abandonment and theft of his property, meaning herself and anything she took with her. I wish I had better news, son, but this is not a situation where the law protects the innocent." Ethan left the lawyer's office feeling sick to his stomach. He rode back to the cabin in silence, already formulating and discarding plans. They could not stay here, that much was certain. Eventually someone would spot smoke from the chimney or tracks in the snow, and it would only be a matter of time before Thomas came knocking. But where could they go that would be truly safe? When he walked through the cabin door, Winona took one look at his face and knew the news was bad. Samuel was sleeping in a makeshift cradle Ethan had constructed from a wooden crate and soft blankets, and she was sitting beside the fire mending one of Ethan's shirts that had torn. She set down the needle and thread slowly, her expression resigned. "He is looking for me," she said. It was not a question. "Yes, and he has half the town believing you are mentally unstable and in danger. Anyone who finds you will think they are doing the right thing by returning you to him." Winona closed her eyes briefly, then opened them with new determination. "Then we will leave. Samuel and I. You have done more than enough for us already, and I will not put you in danger by staying here." "Where will you go?" Ethan demanded. "You have no money, no horse, a newborn baby, and a husband with connections tracking your every move. You would not make it 10 miles before someone spotted you. Then what do you suggest?" Her voice rose with frustration and fear. "I cannot put you at risk, Ethan. You do not owe us anything." "Maybe I want to help because it is the right thing to do," he shot back. "Or maybe I am tired of running from fights that matter. Maybe I spent the last 3 years hiding in this cabin because I was afraid to care about anything again after Daniel died. And maybe you and Samuel are giving me a reason to stop being a coward." The words hung in the air between them, raw and honest. Winona stared at him with wide eyes, her lips parted in surprise. Ethan ran a hand through his hair, suddenly exhausted. He had not meant to say all that, had not even known he was thinking it until the words spilled out. "I have a plan," he said more quietly. "It is not perfect, but it might work. My uncle lives in Oregon, runs a lumber operation up near Portland. He is family, and he has no love for men who hurt women. If we can get you and Samuel there safely, he would give you work and protection. Thomas's reach does not extend that far, especially if you change your name and keep a low profile." "Oregon is hundreds of miles away," Winona said. "How would we even get there? We ride north, avoiding main roads and towns where possible. It will take 3 or 4 weeks in winter conditions, maybe longer with the baby, but it is possible. I have money saved enough for supplies and to get us started once we arrive." "Us," she caught the word immediately. "Ethan, you cannot abandon your whole life for 2 strangers." "What life?" He gestured around the sparse cabin. "This. Sitting alone in the woods pretending I am content. You said it yourself, Winona. I am not better off alone. Maybe I never was." She stood slowly and crossed to where he stood near the door, close enough that he could smell the faint scent of soap and milk and something uniquely her. When she reached up and placed one hand against his bearded cheek, he felt the touch all the way to his bones. "Why are you really doing this?" she asked softly. Ethan covered her hand with his own, marveling at how small and delicate her fingers were, how much strength they contained. "Because when I pulled you onto my horse 4 days ago, something changed. Because I delivered your son, and it felt like I was part of something bigger than myself for the first time in years. Because when I look at you, I see courage and hope, and everything I thought I had lost. Because maybe I am falling in love with you and I am terrified and exhilarated all at once." Winona's eyes filled with tears, but she was smiling. "I am still married," she whispered. "In the eyes of God and the law, I belong to another man." "To hell with unjust laws," Ethan said fiercely. "You belong to yourself, Winona. And if you decide someday that you want to belong with me, with us as a family, then we will figure out how to make that happen. But right now, all I am asking is that you let me help you get somewhere safe. Let me do this one thing right." She kissed him then, rising on her toes to press her lips against his in a gesture that was equal parts gratitude and promise, and something deeper that neither of them was quite ready to name. Ethan wrapped his arms around her carefully, mindful of her still healing body, and for a moment the world narrowed to just the two of them and the warmth of the fire and the soft breathing of the baby sleeping nearby. They left 2 days later, giving Winona as much time to recover as they dared. Ethan packed everything they would need for the journey, abandoning what did not fit. He took one last look around the cabin that had been his refuge and prison, then locked the door and pocketed the key. Maybe they would come back someday, or maybe this was goodbye to the man he had been. Either way, he was ready. The journey north was grueling. They traveled mostly at night to avoid being seen, picking their way through mountain passes and along frozen rivers. Samuel was a good baby, quiet and alert, but caring for an infant in winter conditions tested all of them. Winona's strength amazed Ethan daily. She never complained, even when she was clearly exhausted or in pain. She simply did what needed to be done, whether that was nursing Samuel in a freezing camp or helping Ethan navigate by starlight. They were a week into the journey when they had their first real scare. They had stopped in a small town called Redding to buy supplies, and Ethan noticed a man watching them too closely from across the street. He hurried Winona back to where they had left the horses, but the man followed, calling out for them to wait. "That baby looks mighty new," the stranger said, his eyes shrewd. "Heard tell Thomas Nash over in San Jose is looking for his wife and their newborn child." Offering good money for information. Ethan's hand moved instinctively to the gun at his hip. "You heard wrong. This is my wife and son, and we are just passing through." The man looked between them skeptically. "Funny, you do not look much like newlyweds. And I could swear I have seen wanted notices with a description matching the lady." "There are no wanted notices because no crime has been committed," Ethan said coldly. "Now, if you will excuse us, we have a long ride ahead." He helped Winona onto the horse and swung up behind her, cradling Samuel between them. The stranger opened his mouth to protest, but Ethan had already kicked the horse into motion, sending them galloping out of town before a crowd could gather. They rode hard for hours, not stopping until they were deep in the forest with no signs of pursuit. "That was too close," Winona said, her voice shaking. "He is putting up notices now. How are we supposed to make it to Oregon if people are actively looking for us?" "We stick to the wilderness and avoid towns altogether from here on," Ethan decided. "I know how to hunt and trap. We will manage." It was harder than he made it sound. Game was scarce in winter, and going days between proper meals left them all weak and short-tempered. Samuel developed a cough that terrified Winona, though it passed after a few anxious nights. Ethan's horse threw a shoe and went lame, forcing them to travel on foot for 3 days until they could trade for a new mount at an isolated ranch. Through it all, the three of them grew closer, bound together by shared hardship and mutual dependence. One night, camped in a cave to escape freezing rain, Winona finally asked the question Ethan had been dreading. "What happens when we reach Oregon? Do you stay with us or do you go back to your life?" Ethan poked at the small fire, watching sparks spiral up into darkness. "I told you, I do not have a life to go back to. That cabin was just a place to hide. But your uncle does not know me. What if he refuses to help once he learns I am a married woman running from my husband? What if he sides with the law? Uncle Robert is not like that. He left Missouri 30 years ago because he refused to support slavery when everyone around him demanded it. He lost friends, business contacts, nearly lost his life for standing up for what was right. He will understand. And you," Winona's voice was barely audible over the rain, "what do you understand, Ethan?" He met her eyes across the fire. "I understand that I love you. I know it is too fast and too complicated and probably too dangerous for both of us, but it is true. I love you and I love Samuel, and I want to build a life with you if you will have me. I understand that nothing about this situation is conventional or legal or easy, but I also understand that walking away now would destroy something precious that we have found in the middle of all this chaos." Winona was crying silently, tears tracking down her cheeks in the firelight. "I love you too," she whispered. "I have been so afraid to say it because it feels wrong, like I am betraying vows I made even though those vows were a trap. But I do love you, Ethan. You are the first person in my whole life who has made me feel safe and valued and seen for who I really am." They held each other that night. Samuel nestled between them, and Ethan felt a sense of peace he had not known since before his brother died. This was what mattered. Not land or money or reputation, but this connection, this family they were building from broken pieces and desperate hope. They reached Oregon in late January, half frozen and nearly out of supplies but alive. Robert Orwell's lumber operation was exactly as Ethan remembered from his one visit years earlier, a sprawling compound of cabins and workshops carved out of dense pine forest. His uncle was a bear of a man with a gray beard and kind eyes, and he took one look at the ragged trio on his doorstep before ushering them inside without questions. It was only after they had been fed and warmed and given clean clothes that Robert asked for the whole story. Ethan told him everything, holding nothing back, and watched his uncle's face darken with anger when he heard about Thomas Nash's abuse. "You did the right thing bringing her here," Robert said when Ethan finished. "That girl and her baby are welcome to stay as long as they need. As for you, nephew, I have been telling you for years that you belong here working with family instead of hiding in California. About time you listened." Over the following weeks, they settled into a new rhythm. Ethan went to work learning the lumber business, physical labor that exhausted his body and gave his mind peace. Winona helped Robert's wife Margaret with cooking and household management, gradually regaining her strength. Samuel thrived in the warmth and stability, growing plumper and more alert every day, but the shadow of Thomas Nash hung over them still. Ethan knew it was only a matter of time before Winona's husband expanded his search north, and he spent sleepless nights planning for that eventuality. He taught Winona to shoot, insisting she learn to defend herself if it came to that. He made sure she and Samuel always had a route of escape prepared, and he slept with his gun within reach. The confrontation came in March, just as the worst of winter was breaking. Ethan was working in one of the distant lumber camps when a rider came with urgent news. 3 men had arrived at the main compound claiming to be lawmen from California, demanding to see Robert Orwell. One of them matched the description of Thomas Nash. Ethan rode back like the devil himself was chasing him, his heart in his throat. When he burst into Robert's cabin, he found his uncle standing between Winona and 3 rough-looking men, his expression carved from stone. The man in the middle was tall and mean-looking, with cold blue eyes that fixed on Winona with predatory intensity. "There you are, wife," Thomas Nash said, his voice dripping false concern. "I have been so worried about you. These gentlemen have been kind enough to help me search for you after you wandered off in your confused state. Come now, it is time to go home." "She is not going anywhere with you," Ethan said, positioning himself beside Robert. "Winona does not want to be married to you anymore, and she is staying here where she is safe." Thomas's expression hardened. "You have no authority to keep my legal wife from me, boy. I have a certificate of marriage and the law on my side. The 2 men with me are deputized by the San Jose Sheriff's Office. If you interfere with us taking her, you will be arrested for aiding a fugitive." "Funny thing about the law," Robert said calmly. "It works different in different places. Oregon has its own jurisdiction, and I happen to be on friendly terms with the federal marshal stationed in Portland. I sent him a telegram explaining the situation, and he is very interested in investigating claims of domestic violence and abuse of legal authority by California lawmen operating outside their territory." One of the supposed deputies shifted uncomfortably. "We are not looking for trouble. Just came to retrieve Nash's wife." "Then you can leave the same way you came," Robert said, "because this woman is under my protection now, and you will have to kill me before I let you take her." Thomas's face flushed with rage. His hand moved toward his gun, but Ethan was faster, drawing and aiming in one smooth motion. "Do not," he warned. "You are outnumbered and outgunned. Walk away while you still can." For a long moment, the cabin was silent except for Samuel's faint fussing as Winona held him close. Thomas looked between Ethan and Robert, calculating his odds, then seemed to deflate. "This is not over," he spat. "She is my wife legally, and I will have what belongs to me." "I want a divorce," Winona said suddenly, her voice clear and strong. "I will testify in court about what you did to me, what you threatened to do to our son. You said no one would believe me, but I am willing to try. And if the law does not support me, Then I will disappear somewhere you will never find me, and I will spend the rest of my life looking over my shoulder. But I will never come back to you. That life is over." Thomas stared at her with such hatred that Ethan took an involuntary step forward, but the man made no move toward her. Instead, he turned on his heel and stormed out, his two companions following hastily. They watched through the window as the three men mounted their horses and rode away into the gray afternoon. "He will be back," Winona said quietly, "or he will send someone else. He will never stop." "Then we make sure we are always one step ahead," Robert said. "I meant what I said about the federal marshal. I will write to him formally, and we will see about getting you legal protection. It will not be easy, but it is not impossible either." The legal battle that followed was long and frustrating, everything Ethan had feared and more. Oregon courts initially refused to hear a divorce case for a marriage that had taken place in California. They had to petition multiple times, gathering testimony from neighbors in San Jose who had witnessed Thomas's drunken rages and threatening behavior. Margaret Orwell proved invaluable, using her connections in Portland society to find sympathetic lawyers and judges. Through it all, Ethan and Winona grew closer. They could not marry, not legally, but in every way that mattered they were already a family. Ethan taught Samuel to recognize his voice and laugh at silly faces. Winona learned the business side of the lumber operation and became Robert's bookkeeper, her neat handwriting and sharp mind perfect for the detailed records required. And in the quiet evenings, Ethan and Winona would sit together by the fire and dream about their future, the life they would build once they were finally free. It took 18 months before the courts finally ruled in Winona's favor. The judge, an elderly man who had lost his own daughter to an abusive husband, granted the divorce on grounds of cruelty and threat of violence. Thomas Nash did not even show up to contest it, having apparently given up the fight after his humiliating retreat from Oregon. The day the papers were finalized, Winona cried with relief and joy and disbelief that it was finally over. They were married 1 week later in a simple ceremony at the small church in Portland, with Robert and Margaret as witnesses and Samuel, now nearly 2 years old, toddling around and getting into everything. Ethan slipped a simple gold band on Winona's finger and promised to love and protect her for the rest of his days, and she promised the same in return. It was everything a wedding should be, joyful and sacred and full of hope for the future. Over the next few years, they built the life they had dreamed about during those dark days on the trail. Ethan became Robert's partner in the lumber business, and together they expanded operations until they were supplying timber for construction projects throughout the Pacific Northwest. Winona opened a small school for the children of lumber workers, teaching reading and mathematics in the same cabin where she had first found safety. Samuel grew into a bright, energetic boy who loved working with his father and pestering his mother for stories about the old days. He had no memory of Thomas Nash or that desperate flight through the snow, and Winona was grateful for that. She never hid the truth from him, but she also made sure he understood that Ethan was his real father in every way that counted. They had 2 more children, a daughter named Rose and another son named Daniel, after Ethan's lost brother. The house they built on the edge of Robert's property was always full of noise and laughter and love, everything Ethan had thought he would never have again after leaving Texas. On quiet nights, after the children were asleep, he would sit with Winona on the porch and watch the stars and marvel at how one choice to help a desperate stranger had transformed his entire existence. "You ever regret it?" Winona asked him once. "Giving up your solitude to take on a ready-made family?" Ethan pulled her close, breathing in the familiar scent of her hair. Not for one single second. You and Samuel and this life we have built, it is everything I did not know I needed. You saved me just as much as I saved you that day." "We saved each other," she corrected, tilting her face up to kiss him. "And we will keep saving each other every single day for the rest of our lives." And they did. Through good years and hard years, through the joys of watching their children grow, and the sorrows of losing Robert and Margaret to old age, through expansion of the business and the building of a thriving community around their lumber operation, Ethan and Winona remained devoted to each other, and the family they had created from desperation and hope. Samuel grew up to be a fine young man who took over the lumber business when Ethan finally retired. He married a school teacher from Portland and gave his parents 5 grandchildren who filled their later years with delight. Rose became a doctor, one of the first women in Oregon to achieve that distinction, driven by her mother's stories about the importance of helping those who could not help themselves. Daniel followed his father into the timber business, working alongside his older brother to modernize and grow what had become the largest operation in the state. When Ethan was 71 years old, he sat on that same porch where he had spent so many evenings with Winona and watched the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and gold. His wife sat beside him, her hair now silver but her dark eyes still bright with the intelligence and strength that had first captivated him. Their grandchildren played in the yard below, their laughter carrying on the evening breeze. "Did you ever imagine it would be like this?" Winona asked, her hand warm in his. "Back when you found me in the snow, could you have pictured all of this?" Ethan thought back to that freezing December day 47 years earlier, to the blood trail in the snow and the terrified woman on the verge of giving birth. He remembered the fear and uncertainty, the desperate flight north, the long legal battles and the constant worry that it would all fall apart. And then he looked at the evidence of their life spread out before him, the children and grandchildren and business and community they had built through sheer determination and love. "No," he said honestly, "I could not have imagined any of it. But I am grateful for every single moment, even the hard ones, especially the hard ones because they taught us what we were made of." Winona leaned her head on his shoulder, and they sat in comfortable silence as the sun slipped below the horizon and stars began to appear in the darkening sky. Inside the house, they could hear Samuel calling everyone for dinner, and soon the porch would be full of family gathering for their weekly meal together. This was their legacy, Ethan thought. Not the lumber business or the money, or even the land they had accumulated over the decades, but this, the love and stability and safety they had created for each other and passed down to the next generation. As they stood to go inside, Ethan paused and pulled Winona back for one more kiss, soft and sweet and full of all the years they had shared together. "I love you," he said, the same words he had spoken to her in that cave during a freezing rainstorm so many years ago. "I will always love you." "I know," she said, smiling up at him with the same expression she had worn on their wedding day. "And I will always love you, my cowboy who rode out of nowhere and changed my entire world." They walked into the warm, bright house hand in hand, surrounded by the family they had fought so hard to protect and build. The little cabin in the California woods was long abandoned, the desperate flight through winter storms faded to distant memory. But the love that had sparked between a frightened woman and a lonely cowboy on the worst day of both their lives, that love burned as bright as ever, a testament to the power of choosing compassion over indifference, courage over fear, and hope over despair. It was, Ethan reflected as he looked around the table at the faces of everyone he held dear, the best decision he had ever made, taking that chance on a stranger in the snow, and discovering that sometimes the people we save end up saving us right back in ways we never could have anticipated. Their story had begun in darkness and cold and fear, but it had bloomed into something beautiful and lasting, a love that would echo through generations long after they were gone. And that, in the end, was more than enough.